Do you even
Let's
know?
Let's get into it. 1, 2, 3. Let's get some more. Have your hands. Some more. Let's get some more.
Why, hello, and welcome to My Whiskey Den, your favorite public access whiskey review show where craft brandy is king. Especially this month. You gotta change it up a little bit. You can't just leave it the way it is. So, I want to thank everyone for being here real early. We're going to break into normal stuff, but thanks, Alan, for being here. Mike, I see, look, he's like doing testing notes down there. Are you sniffing notes right now? Are you taking notes?
I am. I'm taking notes on everything. That's been one of my things. I consolidated all my notes, and then I've been making sure that I keep notes for everything. So one more thing for my kids to throw away when I die.
Does it smell like Does it smell like strawberries?
It could.
Is it scratch and sniff? All right. Like I was saying, thank you everyone for being here early. We really appreciate that. And I forgot to mention because I got excited. We are a proud part of the Bar Cart Co-op with other fantastic shows like Distillers Talk with Alan Bishop, our guest this evening, and Christy Atkins, where they dig deeper into the nuts and bolts of distilling or the cooler things of it. And we also have Bourbon Turntable with Kevin and Drew, where they blend the love of music with the love of whiskey. And then Alan has a whole slew of other shows, One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute, where I say he might be teaching you how to do things if you wanted to do them on your own, is the best way to put that.
That's my new tagline.
And if you have ghosts, you have everything, where you guys look into the actual kind of spirit side of the industry or kind of the supernatural side, which I find a little more exciting. And we all like that kind of, I don't want to call it tangible, intangible, but that kind of unique feel that gets brought into the spirits industry. And I don't know, everyone loves ghost stories, man.
Right. Who doesn't love a good ghost story? Assholes. That's who, Patrick. Assholes.
Well, there's a
Listen,
couple
don't make me write my own jokes and my own punchlines tonight. All right. I'm a little on the slow side tonight. Don't make me do both sides of it.
I don't know. You're already into absinthe. I see that little
Absinthe.
You're a full French whore tonight.
I got a fucking cup of coffee over here. I'm ready, guys.
Oh, all right. Well, like we were saying, thank you for being here because it is Brandy Month on My Whiskey Den, where we're kind of changing it up, getting a little different spirit section into it, and we really this is one that we didn't. I don't know, Mike. I know we liked, but we didn't really delve too much into before. I don't know, before the show. I know I wasn't too much into brandy because for me, it was a little bit sweeter than my usual profile was, at least for the ones that are out in the masses. Even though Wisconsin does drink like two-thirds of Corbell's product line, it still wasn't up my alleyway. But was brandy kind of something you were into before?
Me or Alan?
I was asking you, but then you kind of lagged up for a second. I thought we lost you.
Well, I started falling asleep there for a second. No, so at least my experience with brandy really is, as a whole, I liked. Didn't really get into cognac. Discovered Armagnac a few years ago. Trying not to tell people about it because I don't want them to get it. And then other than that, getting things like, having Corbell, or I could say I've never had Laird's Applejack. I'm not saying that as a point of pride. I'm just saying I've never had it. But I did get, as far as well, at least as far as what we're having tonight with this, with the
Mhm.
apple brandy, like real apple brandy. I'll say that's new because I think that anything that I had that might have been called apple brandy before probably wasn't really apple brandy. I'm sure Alan could probably tell us for sure. But maybe apple flavored brandy. Well, that
Right.
probably would be right. But this was my first purchased bottle of apple brandy, which this was 2 years ago or so.
Amen.
And still went through a couple of them still on that one. That's the first thing actually that I'm having tonight, and I enjoy it quite a bit. And it's nice to spice things up. It's good with a cigar. I have not tried doing brandy old fashions with it, but I wouldn't mind trying that, especially with my other two that I've got, the hazmat version of Old Clifty, which is
Yes.
Yes.
that is so good. Yeah, so
That hazmat bottle that you have, that was the sill box, right?
yes.
So that was actually my Christmas barrel for like 2 years. So every Christmas, right before I would leave work for those 2 days, I would go steal bottles of that. And then fucking Blake bought it. And I'm still a little bit angry that he bought it. Like, I'm glad that it's out there, but I'm a little mad that my Christmas barrel's now gone.
They're still, as of the other day I looked, they still have bottles available.
I'm not paying for my own product.
No. I mean, for other people that haven't had it. You should not have to pay for your own product.
Right. I'm just saying that's a general rule. I'm not paying for the shit that I made myself. I refuse.
Yeah.
So, Alan, I want to spin back because I know you started moonshine and kind of brandy, depending upon what you're using to make the moonshine, can be kind of similar.
Mhm.
Where did brandy come into your life along like the moonshine and the process of you getting into distilling?
That was really when I was a kid. So, you know, my dad and my grandpa, we've talked about all that in the past. We don't have to retread any of that, but they made, you know, sugar shine basically. So they made a lot of corn-based liquor. So basically, instead of converting starch into sugar, you're using the corn to flavor everything, and then you're adding sugar to it, raw or just regular white sugar to it to get the alcohol. But the other thing they did a lot of was they made a lot of brandy. I'm not sure that they did it because of any historical reason or any preference. Really, what it came down to is everybody here in Southern Indiana had a peach tree or an apple tree or a pear tree in their yard, and they didn't want to have to mow over it or deal with the wasps and the yellow jackets and the hornets, which really means that by the time I was 8, I'd been stung by every stinging insect in the state of Indiana multiple times. You know, I can't even begin to tell you how many stings that I got from picking up fruit from people's yards, right? And at some point in time, you start to realize, like, they don't even really care if we get the fruit. This is just an entertainment thing for old people that sit on their porch and watch me cuss.
I was gonna say that seems like something I might do as I got older.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I know this poor dumb moonshiner down the road. He's real desperate for some fruit, and there's a yellow jacket nest over there. It's going to be a good Saturday evening.
I'll invite some more. Tell him to invite some friends.
Absolutely. So that's kind of where it came into my life. And it wasn't until much later on that I started to understand, A, that I had a passion for brandy. I always liked brandy more than I liked bourbon. I've always been a huge fan of apple brandy in particular. And again, like you guys said, your experience with brandy prior to trying any of my stuff was probably cheap and sweet, or maybe expensive and a little more barrel leaning like cognac. Obviously now people are kind of getting into Armagnac. There wasn't really any in between ground that most Americans knew of, right? There wasn't any decent artisanal craft distillery short of Hubert Robin, and that was a very niche market, right? People, they see brandy and they immediately turn their brain off because they don't know what it is. They don't really understand it. And when they taste the real brandy, I think it really surprises them how much they can identify with it, because a real brandy is never going to be, you know, you say peach brandy and somebody immediately goes to, oh man, it's going to be like fresh peaches. No, you say apple brandy and they think like Granny Smith apple. If you smell either of those two things when you open the bottle, somebody's cheating. That's all there is to it, because it doesn't work that way. It's not linear, right? At best, the best you can hope to do as a distiller is to capture some of that fresh aroma of the fruit as it was when it was ripe on the tree. And maybe you get some of that stewed fruit, you know, on the palate. Maybe even like with apple brandy, you get like a little apple crisp or something of that nature. Peach brandy's even weirder because it tends to go sort of like a buttery sort of direction more than anything else. So
the peach brandies that I've had are I've liked them, but they kind of err on an artificial peach. And I don't know if that's just something with when you make the peach brandy, but it always just has it just tastes like added flavor on those. I've had a few. I've had apricot brandy that was kind of the same way too. There was just it tasted like apricots, but it almost tasted like a little something was thrown in there on it.
And see, yeah, that's a thing too, because a lot of these guys, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody, and there's big guys and little guys both that do it, but they will throw extract or something of that nature in. And the thing with brandies is it's a lot like what you see out in Pennsylvania with people restoring rosin rye and trying to find other heirloom varieties of rye, right? These traditional localized varieties of brandy were made from very specific varietals, and those varietals don't exist anymore. So even if you get a decent apple brandy or a decent peach brandy, sometimes the varietals, they weren't bred for brandy production. They were bred for culinary use. So they're going to have a slightly different aroma and taste to them because they were bred that direction. As a matter of fact, I'll give you guys a great example just talking about apple brandy. If you talk to people about apple brandy, they'll say, well, what kind of apples you make it out of? And then you'll say, well, there's not enough heirloom apples to do it out of, right? Not on any commercial scale. So you have to use culinary apples. And everybody immediately goes, oh, like Honeycrisp? No, because Honeycrisp is trash when you ferment it. It is literally a ball of water that tastes like nothing when you ferment it. So the only real commercial apple out there, I mean, there's several culinary apples you can make brandy out of. The best one out of the culinary apples is Golden Delicious. It actually seems to translate the best out of all of them, even more so than Granny Smith, which a lot of people immediately think of. So
is it so like with Honeycrisp? Because that's what I wondered. Is it in spite of the fact that it has so much sugar, it doesn't have enough of everything else to balance it out? Is that why? Yeah,
it doesn't have the aromatics. That's a big thing of it. So it has tons of sugar and it'll ferment. But I mean, by the time you ferment it and distill it, you might as well be making a neutral spirit, right? It just doesn't have enough character to carry over in the distillate. Red Delicious is very much the same way. Macintosh makes decent brandy. What else is out there? Fuji surprisingly makes decent brandy. Of all things, I was going to ask. You wouldn't think so, but it does. Granny Smith. So Granny Smith, people automatically think of Granny Smith because they always think of like sour green apple, and what they're really thinking of is that Jolly Rancher thing. And if you ever open a bottle that has that aroma, it's for sure being faked. Somebody has done something to it to make it smell like apple. The other thing with Granny Smith that people don't realize is that little green tart apple that you buy at the store, the reason it's green and tart is that apple originated in Australia. So the apples that we get that are here called Granny Smith, they're not ripe. When that apple's ripe, it actually goes yellow and has an outstanding flavor, but you can't really find those here.
Huh. So, okay, I want to go back because you had said you kind of early on started with apple brandy. Why apple brandy?
So, and you guys are going to have to lasso me a little bit this evening because I'm
this is something I wanted to know anyway. So.
Yeah.
This is good. He's lighting a cigarette, folks.
Right.
Uh-oh. Watch out.
This is just fucking stress smoking at this point in time. So, so the reason for me with apple brandy, obviously I told you, you guys know the home distilling story of the audience. I presume most of them that are watching are going to know that home distilling story. Plus the apples, peaches, pears were free. I presume most of them are going to know the Copper and King story, and that I started off there legally. So obviously apple brandy was going to be a big part of that. And to be honest with you, when I went into Copper and Kings, I had wanted to be a grain distiller. I wanted to be there's some stupid romanticism about bourbon, which I'm now obviously somewhat over to some degree or the other. But when confronted with having to produce brandy, my passion leaned into apple brandy. And I think a lot of it was literally because I kind of knew how it worked, right? And I already knew some of the Indiana history of Southern Indiana, the Black Forest region, Washington, Orange, Lawrence, Crawford, Harrison, Perry County being the capital of apple brandy production in the 1800s up to 1914. The quality of the apple brandy, I knew the stories behind it. So I felt like there was something geographically and culturally that I could really lean into that I also already had some experience in. That may have led to some frustrations at Copper and Kings because it probably didn't see eye to eye necessarily with the people who were really in charge of that program. But that's why I leaned so hard into that. And it was super important to me. And that's one thing I'm still proud of to this day. When I was at Copper and Kings, myself and the other distiller, that was the one thing that those guys were actually fermenting themselves. We did ferment our own wine to make our apple brandy out of. It wasn't being purchased as low wines from out of California. It was the one thing that we could legit say we produced ourselves. So, so that for me is wanting to be a, as Pinocchio said, a real boy one day. That's kind of a point of pride, I guess. So
all right, I'll call it a follow-up question. Yeah. So on an episode, and I don't remember the guy's name, but it was on an episode of Distillers Talk, I'll call him an apple expert. And I remember him talking about a lot of different apples that grew around there. And I thought I remembered him saying something about, because there was a big history of apple brandy in Indiana. Mm-hmm. And am I right that he said something about, like, the legend of Johnny Appleseed? He wasn't just planting apple trees; he was planting apple trees that could be turned into apple brandy.
Absolutely, yeah. That was my my good buddy Aiden Pemberton, who is part of a group with myself and a couple other guys. What the hell? There's a name for it, and I can't even remember what the name of the group is. I didn't come up with it. The Unholy Apple Alliance is what we call it. Mm-hmm. So we're all passionate about apples and apple brandy and apple cider. But yes, very much so. John Chapman, the real Johnny Appleseed, what he was doing, he was smart. He was a land speculator. A lot of people don't realize that. And even though he didn't die with any money in his pockets, he died a very, very rich man without realizing it. So he was basically going to the apple mills that were making cider and brandy on the East Coast. And he was getting what they called their pips or their pippins, the seeds from the apples. And he was carrying those back to the frontier. And when he would come into the frontier, what he would do is he'd basically plant a nursery. So he'd put all the seeds out in basically rows, like garden rows. He would then build fences out of, the various branches and trees and stuff that were around. He would leave that area, go further out into the frontier, and plant another one. Well, he didn't realize at the time that what he was also doing was he was claiming land by planting those apple trees. So, if you plant an apple tree, especially in the Western frontier, in those early days, that's basically the same as a land claim. It's the same as saying that you plan on doing something with this land in the future. And subsequently, he died a very land rich man. Never knew that he was land rich, but those apples were important to the frontier because of distillation as well as cider making. As is well known, most people didn't drink the water because it was considered unfit for human consumption or unhealthy. And so distilled spirits were going to be a very big part of that. And particularly in Ohio and Indiana, what you run into is cider production never was a real big thing in most areas of southern Indiana and southern Ohio. It was always apple brandy. So those trees were not really ever selected for anything else. So if you take the seed of an apple, most apples don't come back true from seed because they're pollinated by a male and female flower, right? Some of them are self-pollinating, but it's pretty rare. So when you plant that seed, you don't know exactly what you're going to get, right? And either you get a really good apple in 7 years, and 7 years is a long time investment, or you get a really shitty apple in 7 years, or you get an apple that's really good for one particular thing, and you just start selecting for those brandy apples. That's kind of what happened here in southern Indiana with the Black Forest region, where a lot of German descendants came in from the Black Forest region with a long history of brandy production, started planting apple trees and letting those grow, and then selecting specifically for apple brandy production, whereupon in the 1850s, you end up in that 6-county region. Each of those 6 counties had somewhere between 145,000 and 155,000 apple trees per county, none of which were selected for human consumption to eat out of hand, none of which were shipped out because there were no great roads, none of which were made into cider, all of which were being used for apple brandy.
Were they shipping any of it out and about from Indiana? Just because of that mass, it seems like you I don't know, you cornered the market, not per se. I mean, everyone was making it across the country, but if you have an area that's specifically making apples that no one really wants to walk up and grab and eat, because that's half the appeal of an apple orchard, let's be honest, is to walk through and steal a couple apples. I'm sorry,
it's Wisconsin.
Appropriate is the word you're looking for.
Well, I'm just
appropriated some apples.
I'm just trying to help spread the seeds,
That's a great pickup line.
I love how this is going, because like I'm in my head, I'm going, I'm going, all right. So how do you tell the story that you've told my whiskey den before, but tell it in a different way? And so we've back ended into the Black Forest again now. And I'm like, now I get to look at this in a different way without having to do it like linear, which is more fun. So yes, they exported a ton of apple brandy. We actually have receipts of apple brandy being shipped out of southern Indiana, downriver, on the boats, and ending up in Normandy, France. Normandy, France is the home of Calvados, right? Fantastic
Mhm.
apple brandy. The fact that they were actually shipping apple brandy from southern Indiana into Normandy, France by the mid 1800s tells me that, one of two things: we either made really good apple brandy or we made really cheap apple brandy. Either way, the French would rather drink ours than drink their own at the time. So that's pretty special. Also, that Black Forest region, that was considered the world capital of apple brandy production between 1858 and 1914. Even all the way up to 1914, the largest of the distillers in the Black Forest region, of which between those years there were 155 plus making apple brandy legally, plus all the illegal distilleries that were here. The largest one was the Sterling Alexander and David Kemper Distillery in Harrison County, which is right on the river, New Amsterdam and Mockport, Indiana. They're making about 1,200 barrels a year, roughly. So you're looking at 3 bushels of apples to make 1 gallon of brandy, to kind of put that in perspective. So from August until January, these guys are turning and burning to run through these apples because that's how they were licensed. That particular distillery was actually, all the way up until 1914, recognized as the largest apple brandy distillery in the world. And I love Laird's, and they would argue that that was not the largest, but it was recognized as the largest at that time. And it was even considered all the way up until 1914, considering that California has already come online with Christian Brothers, etc. It was considered the largest brandy distillery in the North and the second largest brandy distillery in the United States. That's including Great Brandy, Peach Brandy, etc. So that's the real big claim to fame, is that particular distillery, which unfortunately, post Prohibition, no one has heard of, because Prohibition just destroyed the apple brandy industry completely in southern Indiana.
Did it destroy the types of trees that were there too? Just because it giving like the time frame, like did that play an effect on what was planted there?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things that happened is, so you think about what we just talked about with the diversity of those apple trees coming back true from, or not coming back true from seed, right? So every one of those apple trees that pops up is going to be a cross of 2 different trees. Sometimes you might even get multiple crosses back and forth, plus whatever crosses came before. So all that genetic background starts showing up over time, especially over generations. So short of just a very few named varieties, especially by the late 1800s, there are a few named varieties that pop up in the Black Forest region, such as the Turley Wine Sap. That was kind of the premier apple brandy apple, right? Otherwise, none of these other trees were ever named unless they were just named by the farmer, right? But each and every one of those 145 to 155,000 apple trees in each of those 6 counties, as long as it wasn't a named variety that they had grafted, and it was one that was grown back from seed, it was specifically genetically diverse. There would have been no 2 that were exactly the same in any of those 6 counties. So the genetic diversity that would have existed in that 6 county region amongst apples would have been massive. I mean, it would have been insane. Nothing like that really exists this day, unless you go somewhere like you go to Kazakhstan, which is kind of the homeland of apples, and there's several wild varieties of apples there, and half domesticated varieties and domesticated varieties, and all crossing sort of back and forth in between. But otherwise, in the United States, nothing like that exists that I know of.
So, all right, I want to take a step away from, well, maybe not from apple brandy, but what's your ultimate brandy? That could be, what's the brandy that you want to make, something you are pursuing, the best one you've ever had?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. Honestly, so I love Slivovitz and I love Palinka. I love fruit-based brandies in general. Especially fruit mash brandies. I think those are really cool, where you're actually, instead of using the juice, you're actually grinding up the entirety of the fruit, sometimes even some small proportion of the seed, and getting some extraction out of it. And I like those as both white spirits as well as brown spirits. And strangely enough, maybe because I'm more of a traditionalist, I even like some of the Palinkas and Slivovitz that I've had from Europe. You'll find what in the United States we might You guys still there? Lost you for a minute.
Yep.
You're
Still there.
good now.
Gotcha. You guys still there?
Yeah, we're good now.
Yep. We're good.
Yellow. Okay. Weird. Okay. Anyways, some of the things that we might in the United States think of as flaws, like a little bit of VA, or even a little bit of Brettanomyces in Eastern Europe, those are not flaws; those are part of those spirits. And so I really like that sort of thing. I like folk distillates like that. You know, a lot of the traveling distillers in France, I've had some of those distillates over time. Some of those are things that there's no way that I could make and get it to represent the right way. Blackberry brandy is a very good example. My ultimate brandy that I would love to make is I would love to see enough heirloom and or genetically diverse apples grown in the state of Indiana to be able to put down 8 or 12 barrels of Indiana-based apple brandy at some point in time. 100% apples grown in Indiana, mashed in Indiana, the old-fashioned way, using limestone water, boiling limestone water, grinding up the entirety of the apple with the skins and all, and then fermenting the entirety of that, and then distilling the entirety of that in a double pot still distillation. That would be my absolute dream. That, and the other is we have a little peach that grows around here that I think I've told you guys about in the past. It was called the Fleener peach. So John Fleener came here in 1806, and he's the first distiller we can prove distilling in the state of Indiana in the Black Forest region. Tanner's Creek, if you go to Lawrenceburg, they'll tell you Tanner's Creek is where it started at 1802, but there's actually no record of that. We have actual record of John Fleener distilling in Washington County, Indiana in 1806. We also have record of his 3 wives and his 23 children. So he for sure existed, but he and his brother were the sons of a famous peach brandy and apple brandy maker who traveled back and forth between North Carolina and Virginia. And his brother Abraham brought with him seed of a little white clingstone peach that he brought back to southern Indiana that they call the Fleener peach. It comes back true from seed every year. It still comes up around old still sites that haven't been disturbed to this day. I've got about 20 of them on the farm. I would love to have enough of those at some point in time to lay down 3 or 4 actual 53-gallon barrels of peach brandy of nothing but Fleener peach, no sugar, no nothing, and just see what happens. And kind of going back to that aroma and taste of peach brandy. A real peach brandy made from peaches intended for distillation, not eat out of hand peaches. Again, it's got that buttery, bitter almond kind of character to it, and it has a peach aroma, but you're not going to get peach on the flavor. It's an entirely different experience. Do the skin and seeds come through as bitter notes. So yeah, it just depends on what you're doing, Richard. So for example, with apple brandy, a lot of people worry about cyanide coming through, proto-cyanide off the seeds of various fruits. Maybe to some extent, yeah, you probably get a little bit of that, but it's in such a small quantity. It's not going to hurt you any more than the small quantity of methanol that comes across in distillation. With peach brandy in particular, if you leave some of the pits in, you definitely can get a little bit of like a bitter almond sort of characteristic to it. And a lot of times if I'm consulting with somebody that wants to make peach brandy, I tell them, you know, if you can just get peach concentrate or whatever, that's great. But if you really want to step it up, if you can get a hold of some bitter almonds and grind some of those up and throw them into the fermentation and distill them, you'll have a much better representation of what historic peach brandy really was.
Well, how much of that is allowed, like beforehand? How much playing, like you just said, grinding up nuts and tossing them in? Is that, you know, is it as, I guess, is it more? It seems to be less strict than whiskey.
Yes, and so that, I think that's part of the problem with brandy, right? Is it's sort of all over the place, and that by the time that, you know, the TTB really got around to creating regulations, you're already, you know, a generation of brandy drinkers and brandy producers has died out by the time that happened, and so there's not a great understanding of what brandy was prior to that. I don't know how the TTB would feel about throwing the bitter almonds in there. I'm sure they would refer you to the FDA and all that fun stuff, right? So there is that. You know, the brandy regulations are much less stringent in general than the bourbon regulations are, even down to the extent, for example, that you can have I can't remember the exact class type and how it's said, but you can actually label something an inferior brandy. So that's a fun little term, which means it was made from like the lees and the leftover stuff from winemaking. If you are, and then there's some that are a little more strict. So if you're 2 years old and you're a bourbon, right, you can call yourself a straight bourbon whiskey. If you're 2 years old, or if you're under 2 years old and you're brandy, you have to actually label it immature, which is also kind of a fun marketing word. Um, there's percentages of shit that isn't brandy or wood, we'll call it that, that are allowable in brandy. By my terms, here's the way that I would look at it: whether or not whatever the legal, as a non-representative currently right now at this exact moment, I'm taking myself out of the Spirits of French Lick conversation, and as a representative of One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute and a distilling historian, I would certainly think that a peach brandy with some bitter almonds added into the mash is a much more authentic brandy than a grape brandy with added flavors and aromas. But that's just me.
So, okay, let me ask you a question. Is there a guilt? Well, I know you'll say anything. Is there a guilty pleasure brandy? Like one that you are a brandy that you're just.
Whoa. Hold on. So I know you'll say anything.
You're an open book. You're an open book.
Almighty. I love you, Mike. I love you. That's a nice beard. I wasn't going to make fun of it, but now I'm making fun of it the rest of the night.
Go for it. I don't care.
I love you.
I love you too. Man. But no, is there one that you're just like, I mean, even some behind the counter gas station brandy or something, and you're just like, I like this stuff.
No, that shit. No, it's trash. Yeah. All right. So as far as like brandies that I would buy, listen, if it's cheap, it's not real brandy. So the thing about brandy, regardless of what kind of brandy it is, whether it's grape brandy or it's apple brandy or fruit brandy of some sort, we'll just use apple brandy as an example. I can produce 5 barrels of bourbon at Spirits of French Lick for what I can make 1 barrel of apple brandy, right? There is no way, even on mass scale, unless you're using just the cheapest of the cheapest ingredients and adding some flavoring, that you're going to get a pint of brandy at $8 a pint. It's not fucking happening, right? Unless you're making it out of, say, Thompson Seedless. Okay, so there's a hint to how they pull that off. So Thompson Seedless is that big green/yellow grape that everybody sees at the store that every raisin in the United States is made out of. That's how those guys pull that off. And the thing about Thompson Seedless is, if it were used appropriately as, say, a blending ingredient, it's a 1-note grape. It has 1 note all the way through. It's sweet all the way through. That's all it is. If it was used as the backbone of a blend at, like, say, 50%, and you built off of that with other brandies that were fantastically flavored, you can do cool stuff with it. Otherwise, it's $8 a pint. And it's sweetened and it's flavored and it's not good and it's not representative of what brandy should be. And in my opinion, it should not be called brandy on a legal basis, but good luck getting everybody on the same page with that deal. If I'm not drinking my own brandy, my personal favorites, like the Hubert Robin stuff, especially the single varietal grape stuff, as well as the single varietal apple stuff that he's done over the years. It's expensive, but it's very worthwhile. I love Calvados. I actually tend to like Calvados that is off of a single pass, so not the Pays d'Age Calvados. I really like Armagnac a lot. I can't fucking afford Armagnac or Calvados very often, so I don't get much of those.
The Armagnac one is legit. That's a pain. All of a sudden,
it's
like,
crazy.
People got excited about it, and it went from like expensive to like, I can't play in that park anymore.
I know. I need to keep my mouth shut about Calvados, because it'll get there. When people start finding those single pass Calvados and they really start tasting the kind of character that comes out of single pass Calvados, it'll be the same sort of thing. And then I do like Laird's 7.5-year-old bottled and bond. I really, really like that quite a bit. Laird's is a great distillery and a historic distillery that deserves much more recognition than they get. I mean, I don't know why Laird's is not. Obviously, we're talking different categories here, but apple brandy is very much so bourbon's sexier older sister. I don't know why Laird's is not mentioned amongst the major American distilleries in the United States. That doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever, why that they're not part of that conversation. If you're a bourbon drinker, you're going to find something in apple brandy, especially a well-made apple brandy, that you like. You're going to find something that's familiar. It's just a little different, a little rounder, maybe a little fattier, a little more fruity on the nose, not necessarily the flavor profile. you're certainly not going to switch from bourbon over to apple brandy, but give a good apple brandy a try, and you'll probably buy a couple bottles a year, anyways.
Well,
Yeah.
I find it finds its way for me into cocktails, and it
Mhm.
it feels less affected by the wood, in my opinion. You feel more of the actual. Well, since you're working with usually just one fruit, you're getting more of the effect of that. And like you said, in the full mash, which I agree, you get more of like the rind and everything, so you get more of the encompassing flavor
Yeah.
involved in it. So I think that's what's neat.
There's that, and then there's production practice too. So most distilleries, as you guys know with bourbon, most bourbon distilleries, they'll go in at either low entry proof, or they can't go above 125. Brandy traditionally is barreled at still strength. So if you're doing double pot still, for example, it might come off at 135 plus or minus a couple degrees proof.
Nice.
And the reason that you're barreling at pot still strength is basically because you want that alcohol to actually be more stable. With bourbon, you're trying to encourage micro oxidization over time, right? And lower proofs destabilize the alcohol. You get more oxidization over time. So therefore, you're getting more barrel influence, and at a lower proof, water's more soluble, or wood's more soluble in water than it is ethanol. So for bourbon, that makes a lot of sense. With brandy, you stay at 135 because you want that alcohol to stay more stable. You don't need the micro oxidization the same way that you do in a bourbon. Because if you try to go that level of putting the brandy in at a lower proof like that over time, especially in a warehouse that might get a little bit too hot, what's going to happen is that barrel is just going to completely run that brandy all the way over. And you're just going to have the barrel and no brandy flavor, no brandy aroma. If you, for example, with apple brandy, if you lose the aroma of apple brandy, you've lost the apple brandy. The apple flavor will be completely non-existent if you lose the aroma in any way, shape, or form. So it's very important that with brandy in particular, it's very important that it's a 50-50 relationship between that raw distillate and that barrel as it matures. And you can even do this. We did it with the new bottled and bond Old Clifty here, as well as the hazmat that Mike has there. That's New American Oak, right? And that apple is holding up fine against that New American Oak, but it's because we held that proof where we needed it at. And if we had dropped that proof, we certainly would have lost that. I also think that brandy is an exciting category to be in because, there's so much bourbon and rye out there. We've talked about this many times. And the previous example I gave is I could take you to, 7 or 8 different distilleries between Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky that all look the same, have same consultants, etc. The other way to look at it is if you walk into Total Wine and Spirits, what do you have? You've got an aisle on each side of you that is bourbon, and it might be 2 to 3 aisles long, and it might be 5 shelves high. How are you getting into the market there? Unless you're making great product or it's gotten great reviews from people are paying attention to, no one cares. Brandy has still got plenty of space to grow into, and it doesn't just have to be simple things like apple brandy or grape brandy or single varietal, right? Why wouldn't you, for example, make a grape brandy that might be 3 different grapes that you blend together, right, and distill off in a mash bill sort of thing, or have split brandies, which are half brandy and half grain. Or, for example, we're getting ready to release a brandy that we call Palindrome, which is our apple brandy. We took 2.5 barrels of our 4-year-old Old Clifty apple brandy and New American Oak No. 2 char medium plus toast. We blended those together, and then we went into a once used Isla barrel, so it's a smoked apple brandy. Right. I'll make sure you guys get that for sure. So that's been my baby, and I'm not going to lie to you.
So that's the Christmas
it's got me in trouble a couple times already. So
all right. So between you, us talking with you now, and now the lovely Robert has joined the chat as well as Miss Nancy. So what is it about people that know how to make brandy that makes them better at making whiskey?
That's a really good question. So here's what I'll say without not trying to be a smart ass, although I always come off as a smart ass anyways, and you guys know that. I don't know that we're better at making whiskey. What I would say is we have a different approach to making whiskey in general. And I think a part of that is it goes back to the thing I say about there not being a such thing as a master distiller, right? Okay. So if you take, let's just say Jimmy Russell, all right, and for all intents and purposes, Jimmy was the master distiller, is the master distiller of Wild Turkey. If you want to know something about Wild Turkey, Jimmy's probably going to know. If he doesn't know, he's going to know somebody that does. But if you took Jimmy and you drop him into a Soviet bloc country and you gave him a pot still and a plum tree and you said, make me a world-class Slivovitz, Jimmy's probably going to be like, well, what the fuck's Slivovitz and how do I make it? And that's, I'm not saying that in a disrespectful way. And maybe Jimmy doesn't care about Slivovitz. He doesn't like to drink it. But the one thing that he may not have ever taken into account, and I think a lot of distillers are like this, especially if they're very bourbon centric, is how making Slivovitz or how that approach to Slivovitz production might affect his art in particular, how he might look at bourbon in a different way, because there's one little method that's done in that particular region, in that particular style, that could be applied to bourbon and change things entirely. I just think there's more of an openness, I think, when if you're open as a distiller to making brandy and researching that and looking at the world traditions of brandy and the cultural traditions of brandy, especially in a microcosm like where I'm at with the Black Forest, right? You're going to find distillation methods that nobody else uses anywhere else. And those methods can inform all the other things that you do to some degree.
Well, along with like just going back to the brandy with what you're talking about, I think Mike and I, we've talked about this in the past. People, distillers who have a brandy making background seem to, in my mind, and not all the time, obviously, make a more cohesive whiskey. I was going to say it seems to be married together better. I was going to say a lot of times because of the practices they use, but it just seems I don't want to say it's not that it can't be in your face, though even it could be loud. It's still, it plays a nice song instead of being like a punk band. It's more of like a quiet symphony.
I think probably too, part of that, honestly, is the respect for the raw materials, right? Because if you look at grain distilling, whether we like it or not, what it became for a very long time was commodity distilling, right? You're distilling commodity crops that don't really cost anything. The real goal there is, to get as much ethanol out of the fermentation, distillation as what you can, mature it the best way you can. Not that there's not artistry that goes into that, right? You're dealing with what sometimes are subpar raw materials. Brandy, on the other hand, is not a commodity because it can't afford to be. You can't store the fruit. The fruit's not always in season, right? The fruit may be rare, right? If you're doing single varietal apple production, it's probably pretty hard to get a hold of that fruit. You maybe only get it once a year. Maybe you only get it once every 3 years. Even here in the Black Forest region, when we were the capital of apple brandy production, if you go back through history, you'll see years where there was none made because you would have a really great year where the trees were loaded, you'd have an okay year, and then you have a year or 2 years where the trees needed to rest and they didn't produce anything. So the actual raw material itself, I think the brandy distiller stands in reverence of whatever that raw material is that he or she is working with, right? And wants to do the best they can to present that material in the format of a distilled spirit, because it should be treated as something special, right? It's especially the agrarian history of distillation being taken into account. There's some philosophy that falls into that, I guess, is what I would say. So,
no, agreed. So the chat was going up with some other stuff in agreement with what we were saying. I think is the easiest way to put that. Excuse me. Whew. No, I just had a little bit more of that the complexity. I forgot that it was 72.6% alcohol.
How dare you forget that?
I'm being forced to remember now. That's what I'm saying.
Did I tell you guys how the hazmat apple brandy thing started? Have I told you guys that story in person or not? I don't think I have, but
I don't know if you have either.
No.
That was, and you guys know how I am. Like if on a lark, I will do something just to see if it'll work. I thought that hazmat apple brandy though was the dumbest thing I'd ever heard of. Really? Truthfully, I did. Into it. Well, I did. I have now. I have to, right? I don't have a choice. People paint me into a corner, and then I just have to fight my way out of it. But so there was a barrel group that picked one of those, and what that is an apple brandy that we cut like a white spirit, no heads, no tails, all hearts, right? Just like you would a moonshine. We put that into what had previously been originally once used red wine barrels. So they were French oak barrels, French red wine barrels that were French oak. They then sent those barrels to Mexico where they had organic Blue Weber agave tequila, but they wouldn't tell us the brand. We got a hold of the barrels and we put the apple brandy in those barrels from the get-go. So we completely matured the apple brandy for 4 years in those tequila barrels, which is kind of cool. I had done a tequila barrel apple brandy at Copper and Kings, but it had already been aged to some degree before it ever went into the tequila barrel. We sat on those for 4 years, and whenever we'd bring in a barrel group that was going to pick a barrel, like that was like the one I would end with before lunch because it was high proof, right? It was going to be like 140, 141. Never thinking that anybody would want to pop on one of those for a single barrel. So this group picks one as a single barrel. They don't want the whole thing, though, which means that we're going to have to keep half of it and put it in tasting room. And they wanted it barrel proof. And I'm like, you do realize that barrel proof is like 141.5 or something goofy, right? And they're like, yeah, that's great. And I'm like, fine, whatever. And I tell them out front, I'm like, listen, you can put this thing out front, but it's going to sit there forever. Like nobody's going to buy hazmat apple brandy. And so we put it out, we put it up front, and in 3 days, it was gone. Our half the barrel was completely gone in 3 days. And I'm like, all right, well, apparently hazmat apple brandy is now a thing, and nobody else is doing it. So, and then Blake from Sillbox reached out. Jonathan Maisano reached out. We've had a couple other reach out since then, and they want the apple brandy at high proof. And okay, that's fine because they don't. To me, they don't drink like they're high proof.
No,
and that's the problem with them too. Is that you drink too much of it way too quickly. But you know, even to the extent with the smoked apple brandy, the apple brandy that's in the Isla barrel that we have, it's not at 140, it's at like 134. But I'm going to leave it there. And if people want to add water to it, they can add water to it. And if they don't want to, they don't have to. It's up to them. So.
Sorry, I'm just. Go ahead.
I just say I think it's great because everything. Well, not. I'll say everything. Everything that I've heard you say, I didn't want to do this. It turns out really good, and it's all the finishes and other stuff.
Mike's wondering, is there a debacle? Is there a debacle barrel?
Oh, there's always one of those, right? I mean, we've got the Foo Bar barrel and all that stuff, right, guys? I mean, I'm so used to like coming on a show, and I always love coming on your all show because we're friends, right? So, but I'm so used to coming on a show and like playing a character and being like, oh yeah, I planned that from the get-go and this and that and the other. So obviously, as you gentlemen know, it's been a rough couple weeks. So this week is just admit that everything was a mistake and you're lucky. You're just lucky as shit that everything seems to work sometimes.
All right, I'll ask you a question to go down a different track. There's celebrity whiskeys, celebrity everything else, and I know you've talked about working with someone for whiskey. But if you had to make a celebrity brandy, what would the brandy be, and who's the celebrity?
So I don't know that he still even has the winery or not, and he's probably not the best representative for the alcohol industry. But I've always made the joke that Metallica has their whiskey. And, the next best thing to be in Metallica would be being Megadeth. And at one point in time, Dave Mustaine did own a winery in Arizona. I'd jump on Megadeth brandy in a heartbeat because I suspect that's a pretty big check. Just saying. And I like Megadeth, so.
Well,
if anybody's got that.
You got to like who you're working with. I think if you're working with like a band or something, I don't think you could work with someone that you're like, I dislike your music.
No, absolutely not. I would say something trite like Maynard James Keenan, but that seems way too easy. And also he likes Angel's Envy. So I'm not sure that our palates agree with one another that well. So just going to let him do his own thing.
I don't think he would ever do a hazmat apple brandy. I think it would have to be taste more like or give him more of a feeling of a wine than a whiskey.
That. Yeah. See that it would come with a cool insert booklet with no lyrics, right? But awesome artwork.
Yeah. Yeah. Kevin, stirring the pot.
Nickelback. Thanks, Kevin. Yeah. No, it wouldn't even be Nickelback. It would just be Chad Kroger average brandy sold at Kroger. See what I did there?
Carlos Santana's average sellout brandy.
I would do a typo negative brandy in a heartbeat. That'd be cool. Or it'd be real controversial. Drop Morrissey in there. It'd be all about doing a Morrissey brandy.
Is there like I know there's a lot of cherry bounce. Is there like a cherry brandy? Sorry, you went typo negative, and I went different flavor in my head.
Right. Yeah. So there's Kirsch. Yeah, that's a cherry brandy. Really falls a little bit more in line with like traditional what they call German schnapps, single pass distillation stuff. But I like Kirsch a lot. I've played around with a lot of cherry distillation when I was younger and had time to actually go pick cherries and do the whole thing. I don't have a good commercial hookup for that, but I would love to do something more along those lines. So there's just so many different options, right? I mean, so take cherry. You just mentioned cherry brandy, so that's a great example. So I mentioned the smoked apple brandy thing, right? You could even dehydrate and smoke the individual apple slices if you did a mash brandy. We've done that before in the past when I was distilling at home, right? With cherries, think about taking those cherries and roasting them, right? Roast some percentage of those cherries and then drop them into a cherry brandy mash. Now you change the flavor profile entirely from what it was, right? There's so many different things that you can do. You know, if you take a peach and roast it, right? Or even like throwing a peach on the grill sort of thing, some small percentage just to have some effect on the flavor. Or when I was distilling at home with peach brandy, one of the things that I really used to like to do was if you really wanted to get some of that fresh peach flavor, there's a couple different ways to go about it. But the best way that I ever found was having an oversized gin basket and then dehydrating some peaches that weren't even fermented and throw those dehydrated peaches into the gin basket, run the vapor through that and pull that fresh aroma off of them as well. Or even do a double pot still distillation of peach brandy, then take fresh peaches or dried peaches and cut them up at 1 pound or 2 pounds per gallon of whatever your low wine is, macerate them like you would a botanical spirit, and then redistill it. Right now you're infusing that much more of that flavor into that product. There's just so many different options. Or, you know, like the split brandy thing. People always think that that's a moonshine thing. It's not. If you go back to pre-prohibition to the 1800s, you'll see it quite commonly at several distilleries where you'll have something like rye and apple's the one that people think of most commonly. But one of the really common ones back in the day was wheat and peaches, right? And that makes sense. You get some of that sweetness from the wheat. You get a little bit of that kind of, you can sometimes get some of that kind of gingery sort of characteristic off of wheat too. And then you match that up with peaches and you get that buttery thing, that bitter almond thing coming across. It works extremely well. Barbecued peach red. Don't challenge me to a good time. I will make it happen. There will be a video up tomorrow on One Piece at a Time Distilling Institute.
Is there anything culinary or taste wise in Indiana that could be extracted into doing something like, you know, like I said, barbecue peach brandy? Is there like a certain thing in Indiana that you could do something with brandy?
Yeah.
Wait a second here. I mean, Tim does bring this up as an option.
Well, I was going to say what you could do is a pechuga with a tenderloin, and you would start with apple brandy, hang the tenderloin in the still, and then you'd call it the melon camp. That's where I was headed. I mean, that's my brilliant marketing idea for the evening. What the hell was the question again, Mike? I'm sorry, I got sidetracked.
If there was something taste wise or culinary Indiana that could be turned into like a finish or a style or to something with a brandy.
So I would honestly, I would lean into that pechuga thing, and I would lean into ham, and maybe, and honestly, people are weirded out by that, but the truth of the matter is it's the same as fat washing a spirit after it's distilled for a cocktail, right? You're just doing it in a still. But you know, that's one of the things that my dad's always done and that I've done is, you know, I would get some blackberry brandy, which is made by maceration and then distilling after you macerate it to pull that fresh aroma off of it. But we would make basically a glaze and or an injection and or a marinade with blackberry brandy and cinnamon and nutmeg, etc., and put it into the ham and then grill it. But I'm wondering, could you just hang the ham, you know, in the still with some blackberry brandy and then take that and finish it, cook it, etc., right? And what does that do to the brandy and what does it do to the ham? So, and that falls back into those kind of traditional Eastern European traditions. You know, you'll see that a lot of those brandy distilleries in Eastern Europe in particular, like whatever day they're butchering their hogs, making their sausage and all that stuff. That's also the day in the fall time that they're producing their brandies, using their stills in various ways by adding meats into it, etc. Cooking them in the still while they're distilling, that sort of thing. Again, not entirely sure the TTB would smile upon that, but
Well,
this is fantasy land, right? So
Yeah.
like Highwire does their thing where they smoke the grain in the Benton's ham house. I'm like, there's nothing saying you couldn't make like a mash or like part of it and kind of put it in there to get the smoke, like you're saying, in at one form or another along the process to kind of cheat like that.
absolutely.
Okay. Don't challenge somebody in the chat.
Fucking
My daughter just ran downstairs. She goes, "This just showed up at the door from Kevin."
Touche, sir.
Mike, what could that possibly be?
What could it be?
Oh, I don't know. It smells like, speaking of things that smell like hanging meat.
I'm gonna go with a triple McRib
I smell fries, I can tell you that.
with mayonnaise and a mini bottle of Malort.
Oh, there's a drink and fries. That's got to be a McRib. It is. Kevin is the most beautiful man ever. You can take it upstairs.
You can what you meant to say is you can throw that in the trash.
Yeah. You can't have all the fries. All right, go ahead, leave.
Please.
Go for
the
it.
only thing that don't cause any real issues.
Yeah, I dare you to eat the McRib.
Right.
Yeah. Don't worry, McRibs don't process.
That made my day. I'll tell you that. That's the best thing that's ever happened on any podcast I've ever been on.
I was wondering, it's like, who the hell's at my door? Kevin is the man.
I actually heard the bag in the background before it got there, and I felt the puke reflux starting.
I had to get some more water. Ugh.
You can taste the bag.
I'm drinking absinthe, and now all I taste is damn fake barbecue sauce and Malort. Congratulations.
Well, I'll use some hazmat to try to cut it.
I mean, you might be able to take that McRib, take whatever that excuse for meat is.
Nope.
And potentially marinate it, and then tomorrow light it on fire and be done with it.
I wonder if you had enough McRibs, could you just distill them?
No, don't do that.
What? Oh, you know what? We talked about Indiana culinary stuff.
Today,
What about
the McRib?
taking the McRib and doing not a poor man's pechuga, a white trash pechuga, just hanging McRibs in the distillery.
we just on the bottle, just because I grew up in the trailer park. Mike, you've got my brain going. So the label itself would actually be rural route to lot 13, Pekin, Indiana 47165. Not a class, not a category, not a distillery, just an address. That address doesn't exist anymore, just so people know.
Third burning barrel in the parking lot behind the dumpster.
Next to Jolie. Oh, I got her finally.
She's been commenting on you all night.
Oh, I know. I know.
Okay, I do have to say, just because to talk about the brandy at hand, because your brandy that you made. So I've had 3 tonight. I've had the and we're still working on one of them, but the original Old Clifty, the 2-year, the Sealbox Hazmat, still available on sealbox.com, not sponsored. And then also one of the elusive complexity bottles. And I'm honestly, I was really surprised. I wish I had the bottled in bond to do a full comparison, but I'm really surprised going back to this after the hazmat, how it actually kind of holds its own a little bit.
It does. It does.
But the difference also is the hazmat is not, it's not a mouth fire trying to prove a point. It's not the Obtanium Polish rye, hazmat Polish rye, or the Obtanium light whiskey, both of which I do like, but they're both trying to kill you from the outside in and back out again. But the hazmat apple brandy and the complexity, there's flavor, and then it's just like this. There's a warmth that just emanates. It like works its way down and back out. And I took the complexity camping last weekend, and it was 20 degrees outside, and we had that, and my friends that tried it, because some of them they wouldn't because they just looked at the proof, but they're like, man, it just goes down and then it just starts warming you up and works its way out to your fingers. It's like, yeah, it does. And you really only need that much of it for good reason, because if you try to have a glass of that, you're an idiot. But you can taste it, and then it's just that warmth just emanates. It's awesome.
Well, there's a French saying, and I don't speak French, so I'll just give the generalized American version, but it's life is long and life is short, right? And so one of my favorite things to do is, especially in the wintertime, wait till it snows, pour a glass of apple brandy, go outside when that air is crisp and everything is as clean as it can be. Just smell it. Just stand there and see if it doesn't take you back to being underneath an apple tree in the summertime when they're right? A thing that's out of time and out of place, doesn't belong where it is, but it's captured, it's in a bottle, and it's there when you want to go back to it. So, and hold on to a little bit of that 2-year-old stuff too, because that 2-year-old stuff is special. Those were unique barrels in that they were Bordeaux barrels that I had recharged. So they still had just a little bit of red wine deep down in the staves. And I think that brought something very unique to that particular apple brandy party that, I think we made up for it with some of the things that we got out of the bottled and bond, but it's unique. It's definitely, it really could have been marketed differently than what it was as just a 2-year-old apple brandy.
Well, but even 2 years ago, it's like apple brandy, in Indiana apple brandy.
Right. Right. That's a thing. What?
Yeah.
All we got's Johnny Cougar, that guy that plays basketball, and the fucking McRib and tenderloins and Amsey losing.
Yeah.
Well,
that basketball player that abandons his child.
He's a famous rockologist,
but he's a hero.
Amsey losing is a hero.
Well, he's more than a hero, and an epic beard.
He's the hero that no one asked for, but we got anyways.
Yes.
There.
This is where we should pull up the picture of him studying rocks.
Oh, do we have that? So?
We could come up with that picture.
Well, you might have to. I don't think I.
Oh, now Pat's freezing.
Yeah, we can come up with.
Oh. No, he just looks like
freezes
that.
Up.
Every time you get close to the camera, everything freezes. I do want to say, which I meant to say at the top of the show, that I do want to give a toast to Alan's mother-in-law, who fought like hell and is now reunited with her husband, and to Alan, his daughter, his wife, and their family. And cheers to Diane, and peace to the family.
Yes, thank you. Greatly, greatly appreciated, for sure. For sure.
Now, was she a fan of your work? Professional and unprofessional?
Surprisingly. So that's one of the things I always loved about Kim's mom and dad. Both they didn't pull any punches with whatever their opinions were, especially her mom. If her mom gave an opinion and you didn't like it, too bad. Get over it, right? But and she would have a drink every once in a while, and she would, obviously not a teetotaler or anything like that. She did like to drink every great once in a while. I never saw her drunk. Not one time did I see her drunk. I saw her buzzed, and I saw her pretend to drink to get my dad drunk during a card game one time, and that was kind of fun. She got my dad drunk enough that he couldn't make it back out to the vehicle for mom to drive him home. And dad literally made it down the steps, fell down in the yard. I went to help him up, and I believe the exact quote was, let me put on the Dale voice, "Don't fucking touch me. I can do it on my own." So she was a big fan of the Lee Sinclair. She really liked that. Diane was a Coke and bourbon sort of girl. but yeah, she certainly enjoyed that, and I think she was proud of the fact that I had somehow made the transition between being an illicit distiller and an actual legal distiller, and provided some sort of semblance of normalcy and life to her daughter, and hopefully she continues to respect that, and appreciate it. But no, she and I got along extremely well. Um, you know, she's definitely going to be missed for sure, and she was a hell of a mother. I'll tell you guys a little something about her too that you guys may not know. So, her her mom died when she was 13, and she had a younger sister and three younger brothers. So she raised her younger sister and her three younger brothers, and they didn't have anything. Her dad was a tenant farmer for the neighbor across the hill from where we live at, and so she didn't have it easy, that's for sure. And all the respect in the world for the fact that she pulled off all the things she did. She'd been sick for the past year, and she fought it really, really hard, and she kept her shit together, and she kept her shit together even when I feel like I could tell she didn't want to, because she felt she needed to. Right.
Yeah.
All the way down to when we were there with her at the hospital over the weekend, and she went into palliative care. And I kind of knew, because I knew the kind of personality she had, nothing was going to happen when we were there. She waited until we left. She waited until we left, and she waited until what I feel like she knew was an appropriate amount of time for us to get back home and be safe before she left. So,
yeah.
But, yeah.
That's for somebody like that too. I heard a lot of stories from my mother-in-law who ran hospice houses and wrote several books about it. But she said it is not uncommon for somebody to wait for the person that's been their caregiver to go and be safe, and also just to know that it's like, all right, they're taken care of. I can relax, and it's like that. It actually it happens a lot, which is good that she got one last wish in.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. She's, like I said, she was a special person, and as was Kim's dad. And it's not a funeral, it's a celebration, right? There's not it's not, even though it obviously affects everybody in the family, it's not a sad occasion, because we know she's back. Hell, she got the whatever world you believe in after this world. It doesn't matter to me one way or the other. In my opinion, she got to hug her mom, who she didn't get to hug since she was 13 years old.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty special.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. I appreciate that greatly.
Yeah.
Thus the absinthe, cigarettes, and the coffee.
Yeah. No, we think the world of you and Kim and love you guys a lot. So,
yeah, you guys are family. You know that. I can't see the comments, but I suspect there's several family members in the comments. I get shit on social media all the time about why you call people brother all the time or sister all the time. Well, if I call you brother or sister, there's a reason for it, right? So it means something.
Yeah.
Oh. Sorry.
Yeah.
What? Stuff like that. Recently. Yeah. So no, we've all stuff like that.
About that McRib.
Yeah.
Where is the McRib, and why are you trying to avoid it?
I'm not trying to avoid it, but I'll have some of it when I go upstairs.
We'll see the chat about how if he did or didn't tomorrow, and about how things are.
We all participated in eating one on television, and Kevin, it's just not pretty.
Can you DoorDash Mike some damn Christian Brothers so it matches the show, so we can do a McRib and Christian Brothers? I believe you can actually order those together. They have to make two different stops, but it's the Trailer Park Boys. That's what they call it.
Mm-hmm.
It's the number special. One. Yes, the bubble special.
Bubble special.
We'll pour some hazmat on the McRib and see which one dissolves first.
Great, like great barbecue McRib.
Richard says he's going to make the McRib Pachuga happen. Richard, I think you should. You're in Texas, you can make that happen.
That's true. Record the video.
But you might have to be a little careful there. I don't know.
That well, if
He-
Richard
he-
has the influence, he might be able to make that a Saturday video that comes out.
That's true. That very well could be.
So I do have
I'm only laughing because that could really happen.
I do have a question for you guys about brandy though too. So obviously you guys are celebrating Brandy Month. You're interviewing people, etc. So I'm curious, what brandies you guys like? Is there anything that you found? My stuff excluded completely, 100%. What else is out there that you guys have had that you really like? Let me hold on. One more caveat. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
We're excluding anything French. All right, because it's too easy to go Armagnac or Calvados or any of that stuff. So none of that
I was leaning more American, just with the theme of the show in general and with the distillers we had on. But it is almost hard not to play back to that at some point once you start dipping into it. Sorry.
Yes.
Well, I was gonna say we haven't had it yet, and you'll be getting some, but we're waiting to get one other bottle to turn around. But the Wollersheim, they have a bottled and bond one that they age in New American oak, and it is really neat. And I'm going to be honest, it's very similar, Mike, to when we had their the bottled and bond at Distill America, but then they had like the cast strength behind the counter, like hidden away. The barrel strength version of it is really good. Just the way it adds just a light amount of wood notes and stuff to it. It plays well, and they grow their own grapes for what they do and everything. So they have it like specific varietals for what they're using. Forgive me, I don't remember that at the moment. Alan's 72% apple brandy starts rolling on me at this point. But I was gonna say that was one when I had it. I liked it because they have their normal kind of press house brandy, which is like their say $20-ish bottle of brandy. No, the brandy to compete with most things. And then they have their Cocard, which is their kind of their other major release that they have. And then they age the bottled and bond and the new oak instead of the used oak. And I like all of those. One thing I found interesting, though, my friend Matt, who was more of a brandy drinker when we went there for a tour, he liked the bottled and bond, but he's like, obviously I like these other one. You guys had this, and you guys all really loved it. He goes, to me, in my mind, yes, it was nice, it was okay, but it was like the bastardization of fucking brandy. And I was like, I love you, Matt. It's like just a direct opposite thought process to what happened. He's like, no. No. So I'm like, I just like opposite viewpoints. He's like, it's not that it was bad. He's like, I was not prepared for that. He was like, that was not what I was expecting. Damn it.
It's like the maple syrup challenge.
You can chug it.
Yeah. So you said I was gonna say Calvados, but okay. So taking those out of it, I've had Driftless Glen brandy, which I liked it. I like the Wollersheim, that bottled and bond, that was pretty good. Recently, Colin Keegan's brandy, Santa Fe Spirits, that was really good.
Yes.
See other ones that like American.
Had Laird's.
Oh, I haven't had Laird's. I did buy. This was over a year ago. The grocery store down the street. Every now and then they'll just throw a bunch of stuff in a cart and say it's got to go. They were getting rid of all of their Copper and King's apple brandy, and it was under $20 a bottle.
Oh wow!
So I bought a bottle of it. And I was like, oh okay. And then I look, and it's like, well, this isn't anything that you would have worked on. And then the price dropped even more, so I got another bottle of it. It was, and for the price, it wasn't very enjoyable.
Good.
But as far as other American, I mean, the only other American was one I haven't bought because I couldn't buy. I got to try the Iron Root brandy, on one of the trips down there. It was very memorable. Did not get the bottle in the did not make it to the drawing or any of the other stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess, and that's one thing too with the Americans. Which another reason for doing it this month is I couldn't name that many American brandy distillers. You know,
No.
and
Not
there's
great
probably
ones,
someone
right.
making kick-ass brandy that we've never heard of. You know, someone's just making really good brandy, and you know, it's not on a shelf anywhere around us.
Edel brand, we just had them recently on Distillers Talk. They're out of Missouri, and ran into them at the state guild tasting at ADI, and I really enjoy what they're doing. So they had an excellent pear brandy, made kind of in that Swiss / French style. They had a botanical Norton brandy. So Norton, are you guys familiar with Norton wine? Is that a varietal
No.
you ever heard of? So
Yeah,
Norton
no.
to me, normally, like I avoid it like the plague because a lot of times it's like super vegetal. It can kind of come off with these weird, almost like this fat kid tasting note for Kevin here, almost like a steak sauce, sort of like weird, savory, weird.
Oh,
I can't
you
do
got
it.
the tangy. Yeah, sorry.
But they took that and they made, I think it was actually a grappa, a Norton grappa, which is kind of weird because you're using a red skin grape to make this grappa, right? So it's going to be a little tannic. And they added dill to the distillation, right? I think they actually added maybe post distillation, maybe they did a maceration. I can't remember. Fantastic. It was absolutely beautiful. It was the weirdest thing I ever tasted, but it was delicious. Like it wasn't weird as in like I'm not sure I like that. It was weird as in as the minute you taste it, you were in. Like this is a journey. It's a whole thing. They're extremely small mom and pop operation. I really like what they're doing a lot. Another one that I'll mention to you guys, and it's hard to get a hold of. If you guys can ever find a sample of it, I don't think they have any more of it at the distillery. Of course, here in Southern Indiana as well, we have Huber's. And one of the things that they've done over the years that I've really enjoyed and really respect a lot, Ted's dad had some pear trees on his property, some Williams pear, Homestead, Bartlett, whatever you want to call it. They're all the same variety. That's a traditional distilling pear. A lot of people don't know that, but that's what that was really bred and selected for, was distilling. And so they did a very limited aged pear brandy that may be the single best pear brandy I've ever tasted in my life. It was fairly expensive when it came out. I missed out on getting a bottle of it, but I know a few friends that have bottles, and I'm not sure that those friends enjoy brandy the same way I do. So if I'm around them and I see that bottle, I'm like, I want a drink of that now. Just maybe eventually I'll get them down to like that much of a bottle, and they'll just be like, here you go, you can have this. So because it really is that good. It's fantastic stuff. Another one I'll throw you guys that you might still be able to find. They may still have it at the distillery. I can't tell you what distillery it came from. It came from the West Coast. It came through Copper and Kings when I was there, and we also finished it, I believe, in tequila barrels. And I think they released it right after I left. It was called Blue Sky Mining, and it was a 10+ year Muscat brandy. So Muscat is a super phenolic, almost perfumey style grape. And that brandy in particular is excellent. It is fantastic. So if you can ever find that, if you ever see it somewhere, if anybody sees it out there in the market, grab a bottle of it. I don't care what it costs. It's worth it. So
I was bringing up, he had the High West Rye barrel that he thought was yours. The only thing I had from them that I've liked the grape. I think it was Butchertown. Like they're like their later version of the grape, rather than their apple brandy, was the one that I think I like the best out of what they had from them. I thought that was actually kind of had a little more flavor, more punch to it. Just more people to take a look at.
I agree with that too, Nancy. Absolutely.
All right, hold on. I'm going to spin down to Richard's grappa and pisco, and I've had pisco when I was in Peru, so I'm intrigued about your thoughts on this, because I had a good time with it.
Well, that's a good time spirit, Patrick. That's you lean in.
Makes you want to read.
Right. Makes you want to stand in water. Makes you want to stand in water and read a book.
I like pisco. I do that all the time.
So That's one of those rare things when I end up at a cocktail bar, which does not happen often, as the two of you gentlemen know. I don't show up at those places often because I always end up in trouble. Um, Very rarely when I end up somewhere like that, I will look for pisco on the menu, and if there's a pisco sour, it will happen every single time. But it has to be a true pisco sour. You can't use sour mix. It has to be the egg white. It has to be the whole deal. I mean, it has to be legitimate, and I absolutely love it. Grappa, I do love certain grappas, so I'm very particular about grappa in general. Like that was one of the reasons why I didn't think I would like the Edelbrand stuff, because not only was it Norton, but Norton's also a red grape. I tend to not like red grape grappas because they get tannic and they get funky and they get super weird. One thing that I absolutely love, if you can find a place that will import it for you, the country of Georgia is actually the oldest wine grape growing region in the world. And it is incredibly geographically diverse. There are over 500 different varieties of grapes selected specifically for winemaking in Georgia. And they make a lot of oxidative wines, and they make a lot of what are called orange wines, which are white wines fermented on the skins and allowed to slightly oxidize. And they make some orange wine grappa in the country of Georgia that is absolutely out of this world. It will challenge you sometimes because it can, like many of those Eastern European brandies, have a little VA to it, or even a little Brettanomyces.
Mm-hmm.
But it takes you on a journey, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's interesting. It's textural. It's really cool. It's very different from anything you get over here. So.
So if you had to go somewhere else to make brandy, or if you had your choice, that you're like, all right, Alan, he's done. He's going to do his own thing, go somewhere. I know you've talked about going in the Alps and making absinthe, but if you had to go somewhere to make brandy, where would you go?
Oh man. So Italy, obviously the north of Italy, I think would be interesting. I could see myself as a I could see myself as a cheese maker and Calvados maker, because honestly, I'm a fat kid that loves cheese and loves apple brandy. So, it's not a hard stretch for me there one way or the other. But I think some of the things that might interest me more, and maybe this would be more realistic if I were younger than I currently am, not married with a child, but challenging like extremes like would be interesting. So like Spain would be really interesting, right? Places where you're very limited on your grape varieties and how you handle those grape varieties, or I think even here in the United States. So I joked earlier about the Megadeth brandy, or even the Maynard James Keenan thing, right? But anybody who's running a successful vineyard, say like Maynard is out in Arizona in the area where he's actually doing that at, I think that there's something kind of really cool about the limitations that the geography and nature puts on what you're doing and how that affects your art too. So I could see really cool things happening in a place like Arizona, making grape brandy out of what'll grow there, out of the varieties that you have there, right? That tend to lean in towards the more Mediterranean varieties because the climate's very similar. I think things like that are very interesting. So I don't know. I mean, that's one of those things. It could really take you anywhere. And one more. So fantasy world here. All right. So I'm going to tie the distilling thing and the stupid paranormal. If you have ghosts, you have everything thing together here. There's one country on the face of the planet where you can legally be licensed as a brandy distiller and a vampire hunter. Just hear me out. In Romania, that's a legal thing. All right. I'm just saying. I'm not saying vampires are real. I'm just saying I'd like to have the license that says that I could.
But if you're a vampire hunter, doesn't someone have to come up with a little evidence every now and then? I'm just saying.
You could always apply for the supplemental
Insurance.
No, what do they call it? The supplemental citizenship.
I should apply for the drink less absinthe on the My Whiskey Den program.
Nah.
No,
Okay,
it's always
so
a
all
good
right.
time.
So, all right, since you have crossover amongst all the shows here, you've already talked about if you have ghosts. All right, when you're making apple brandy, do you have a different playlist when you're making, or brandy? Period. Do you have a different playlist for making brandy than you do for making whiskey or absinthe?
Yes, very, very, very. Yeah, there's more crossover between brandy and absinthe than there is whiskey and brandy in particular. So whiskey tends to be a little bit more like, I don't know, kind of in your face, leaning into 90s alt rock and metal, and maybe even going into like a little Pantera and Sabbath and outlaw music, all that sort of thing. And brandy and absinthe, I tend to think as being more like introspective, like, and that's where the weird, like getting into the Cure and Joy Division and Adamant and Morrissey and all that stuff sort of comes into play, and it becomes a little more not only introspective, but you have to make fun of yourself to some degree too, a little bit like smelling your own farts sort of thing, right? Gets a little weird real quick. So yeah, certainly there's definitely different playlists for that sort of thing. With apple brandy in particular, I probably listen to more Cure than I do anything else when I'm making apple brandy. So there's just something about the and maybe it's the spirit of the place where I'm at, right? Something about the desperation of particularly the trilogy albums, between Pornography, Disintegration, and Blood Flowers, that sort of seems to fit the region that I'm in and what I'm trying to do with brandy distillation in particular. So
okay, so at Spirits of French Lick, you got this winery that's literally right there. you can walk 5 steps and get to it. You've been making apple brandy. Have you been doing other brandies there?
Yes. So I've got it bottled now. So the 2-year-old apple brandy, the Old Clifty, that was the very first apple brandy from a legal distillery in the Black Forest region since 1914. The Bottled and Bond was the very first bottled and bond from the Black Forest since 1914 apple brandy. We also just bottled recently our Catawba brandy. So Catawba is an American grape varietal. It's actually a hybrid between native North American grapes and then traditional European grapes. And it was the grape variety that the original wine industry was built off of. The first successful commercial winery in the United States was actually in Switzerland County, Indiana, using Catawba. And out of that grew a distillation industry, mostly centered in Cincinnati, Ohio, off of making Catawba brandy. So we will have the first Catawba brandy from Southern Indiana that's bottled and bond. And I don't know when the last time that was made, if it was ever made. Truthfully, I'm sure it was made here at some point in time. I just don't have great records of the varietals of grape brandy that were made here, and there was never a lot made here. But so that was aged in once used brand new French oak barrels. Sorry, one of which was toasted and one of which was charred, which is unique for a French oak barrel. And we left that at barrel proof as well. I want to say that was somewhere around 138 proof, and I hope that that'll be out by Valentine's Day. So
nice.
Mm-hmm. And that one's we leaned into some of the Dionysus mythology there. So I think we actually ended up calling it Dionysus, as a matter of fact. So
nice. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I like that section of history and mythology. So.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I do too. So I'm excited to get that one out there. And I will tell you guys, that one is that one's actually, it's 4 years old. We had one that was 5 years old, and I went with the 4-year-old because we fermented that one back in the distillery instead of the winery. And we actually used the McCoy yeast strain from the McCoy distillery here in the Black Forest of Southern Indiana. And that thing is so full of long chain fatty acids. Like, if it gets a slight chill to it, it looks like snow in the bottle. I mean, it's going to take a very special sort of person that loves brandy to really love that brandy. So, but that was the point of doing it too. We wanted to show people what real great brandy looked like. So
I think that just sounds interesting. Being able to kind of
it does.
Swirl it and be like, hey.
Dude, it's so like unctuous, and there's a little herbal thing going on in it. The Catawba has got a little kind of perfumey muskiness to it as well, and I'm super excited to put it in front of people. And again, the thing about that is there's only a certain group of people that's going to understand it, and I'm good with that. That's completely fine. That's who I made it for. So
well, we've kept you on kind of long today, Alan. It's already been like an hour and a half.
Yeah, I needed a distraction. I appreciate it. So
No, well, I feel like we can let you get back to life, and it's getting late here, and I gotta wrap up one or two things. But
what you meant to say is you're gonna DoorDash a McRib.
no. I just know Mike's McRib is getting cold up there, and that can only mean it's getting better and better.
Those French fries are
worse.
long gone, brother.
Yeah.
They're long gone.
I'm sure of that. I'm sure of that.
But we probably won't see you before Thanksgiving. So wish everyone a good Thanksgiving out there. Hope it goes nice and smooth. Maybe we'll pop in over the weekend. We do have a few reviews we have to get done at some point, Mike. We've got a few things stacked up. But next Monday we are going to. Sorry, I was using the thing to spin and it didn't want to work. We're having Fred Swanson. I know I was bouncing from Dancing Goat on. We're going to be talking about their brandy that they have. Like when I said before about how Korbel sells 2/3 of its supply here, which is honest and legit. They wanted to come up with brandy that was price point competitive besides being I like the flavor of it. It's just not. It has a little more kind of nectarine-y, peachy pear, kind of higher, a different flavor profile than what you would expect when you're going into a lot of brandies. And I like it, but for the price point, I think it is done very, very well for what it is. Especially, I know that wasn't their goal, and I build it that way. But I'm going to keep doing it. They're trying to take Korbel out at the knees in their own state. And I'm like, if you could even take 5 or 10% of that market share, you've done fucking well.
Give me 5% of Korbel on your state, and I will retire, and nobody will ever see me again.
So that's us. So he'll be on next week. And then after that, you saw Robert in the chat. Robert's going to be coming on after that because we have the Sister Cities blend we'll be discussing with him. Nice. At that point on December 5th. And keep your eye out because there are going to be some other ways. There's been one already. There's going to be another one. Ways that you guys can join in and win a chance because on December 19th, we're going to have our holiday brandy bash where we sit down and taste all of these all over again, but with Shannon Hood and Kelly Tennille and anyone else who still wants.
If I have any left of some of these.
Well, I have another set coming to you. I knew you were going to burn through them, so there's no concerns there.
Can Duthy Wodes come?
Yeah, Dusty can come.
He likes the brandy, baby.
That's right. American brandy.
But there'll be a lot of people. Yeah,
I have to ask the question because he brought it up. Have you seen the picture of it was some sort of, I'm sure for children or fundraiser or whatever, a basketball game with wrestlers and I don't know who the other team was. And Dusty comes out there and just drains threes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
It's just
I've seen that. It's nuts.
Yeah.
Yes.
There was someone else that was big like that too that I don't remember, but it was like you wouldn't expect it, but it was just like poof, 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 poof. He's like, no, I don't need to go under. They're like, go box out under the rim. He's like, I don't need to go under the rim.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you.
I love Kevin.
Mm-hmm. Well, guys, thank you guys for having me very much. I appreciate it. And hey, I'll definitely be tuning into the next two. And honestly, thank you guys for covering American Brandy because people do think that it's a joke. They don't realize it's legitimate. Bourbon drinkers haven't thought about it. They haven't even because they've been burned so many times, right? So the only thing we can do for American Brandy is sort of do all you can to educate people. And we won Spirits of French Lick won the USA Today Best Brandy Distillery Award, and it's one of those things like I can't even brag about it. I can't even brag about it because I'm like, everybody's like, oh, he won the Brandy Award. Oh,
it's like winning the Kissing Your Sister Award.
right. Okay, good job there, Alan. Really brought that home for us Hoosiers, didn't you? Huh? So, So anything you can do to educate people on that, I greatly appreciate it. And I'm sure that everybody else that loves Brandy appreciates it too. So
it's just getting people out there to recognize it's worth giving it a try. Like you're not, and like I say, with just like with whiskey, you're not going to hit on everything. But I'm like, there is enough stuff out there at this moment that it's worth giving it a try or giving it a taste and seeing what happens. And if you don't like it the way it is, I can easily see how a lot of these could be used in a cocktail or a different type of creative drink. I mean, if you don't like what you're like, sometimes when you have brandy, you're like, oh, this and this, boom, and it's done. You know, like
Patrick's being a state ambassador now for the Wisconsin Old Fashioned.
Well, maybe.
Well, I think Kevin is too.
Yeah. Right. So, but like we were saying, thank you, Alan, for coming on the show. We appreciate every time you do, and we get a chance to talk to you about it. And like we were saying, get a chance to stop out. If you don't have any of Alan's stuff, there is some of it on Sealbox. We were talking about the Old Clifty. You can get it there. Or you want some of the special stuff, you got to stop by the distillery. It's the way it is. But that's where all the good stuff is. You can do it. You can pull a Rick Brenner and just take like 2 cases of the shit and just abscond with whatever's left there.
Just cart it out of there.
There's nothing wrong with that philosophy. I mean, if you're gonna like it, you might as well just go ahead and get it while you're there.
I'll just tell you guys real quick. We now have a I would hesitate to call him a Canadian Rick Brenner because there's only one legend, but there is there's a gentleman from Canada that's been making the drive recently. And I don't know how he's getting this shit across the border, boys, but he ain't
that's
playing.
That's a hefty payment, man. And if you get caught going over,
he ain't playing.
It depends on the agent, because the agent can just be like, all right.
That's true. And he could not care. That's true.
Yeah.
But
right.
If he does, it's scary.
Yeah.
So, all right. Well, I want to thank you, Alan, and everyone in the chat, and we will see you next Monday. Until then, have a great Thanksgiving, and cheers. Remember, all right, have a good weekend.
Hope you get your turkey stuffed.
Well, do it early, too.
And
What?